You ever been to a really big party? I mean, a big
Yeah.
party where, 200 or 300 kids, giant kegger, people wandering around with all kinds of state of inebriation.
Yes, I've been to that kind of party.
Okay, then that is release language when you stand there and you're not focusing on any individual conversation because some of those individual conversations could be indeed building tension. But the overall hubbub, the general cacophony of voices and noise and everything, that's release language. That's party time. Now, you get that same effect with people in a concentration camp just before they're all slaughtered, or people just about realizing that they're about to be nuked by a nuclear bomb, that kind of a deal. So we can't determine release language as to what the cause is, but those are examples of what the release language is. I would hope that we're a smart enough species that when pushed to the brink, because we're basically lazy butts and we don't do anything until we're forced to, then we'll get off our lazy butts, stop these idiots, and go right into perpetual exponential renaissance, which I think of as giant party, where we all agree we're adults now. We grant ourselves the freedom to interact with the universe the way we need to. We get out from underneath these parental institutions in a kind and gentle way because we want to rehabilitate these poor souls and grab all the cool stuff and start going out and inventing our future in a giant party mode. Because I sure don't want to live in the alternative.
Would the more appropriate question possibly be why there's why we won't have any building tension during that period of time?
That's a real good question. If you look at it one way, when we slice our data one way, if we were to take what we call the entrenched elite, which is actually a sort of more of a metadata layer because it encompasses the entire powers that be entity, as well as all of their originating sets and the cross links and the termination sets in the other entities. If we take all that data and sort of flop it on its side, the language shift in March, the question may indeed be very appropriately phrased as to what happens to the mindset globally that produces building tension language. Because we can say, well, what happens to the building tension language? And I prefer to think of it as, well, what has happened to the minds that it is no longer putting that building tension language out? And there is some reason to suspect that something positive may occur, because we can think of the powers that be entity, the entrenched elite, as being the primary purveyors of building tension language. They're the ones that create the conditions in which building tension language exists, and they promote it through their media, and they're always attempting to shove us into building tension language. They don't like release language. The media uses it continually, and when we get a big release language episode, you'll see the media's in there harping on it as much as they can, but they do it in a spin doctor way, and every time they do it, they always introduce more language that is building tension until they get all the language back to building tension, or attempting to. They're actually attempting to steer emotion with their spin doctors. Now, one way to look at this is that they have an abysmal hard failure somehow, and we all go into release language as they are no longer attempting to control it, or no longer able to effectively push out building tension language. But I actually think that there's something grander going on at a much larger scale that prompts all of us as humans, even if that's the outcome, it prompts us to go and take the steps that lead to that outcome.
Do you know, Cliff, this is the first time that I have felt a little bubble of excitement about the whole possibility.
I can
What
barely
you
contain
said.
myself. I can
Oh
barely
my
contain
goodness
myself
gracious. Yeah.
but I don't want to project because I've always prided myself, and I shouldn't even say pride. I've always attempted as a method of operation to want to see universe unfold and try not to project. But boy, this is sure a time to want to
Oh,
project.
yes, it is. Oh, how exciting. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay, the next question is from Green Meadow.
Hi, Cliff.
Hello? Oh, yeah. Hello?
This question is actually from Fox, but I get to ask it. In our last interview with George Ure, he spoke of a lunch the two of you had, and George noticed a twinkle in your eye that had not been there before, and I think we're hearing a little bit of it. He said the glint was from the realization that the moment of decisive engagement is upon us, and it will likely be the time where we humans decide if we get off our collective knees and shun the shackles of slavery, or if we continue to meekly live under the thumbs of the entrenched powers and let them continue their dominion over us. Personally, I hope to live to see the resolution of this. However, I fear that the entrenched powers will pull out all the stops, including World War III or thermonuclear war. In this scenario, I'm afraid very few of us will survive. It would do my soul good to know that, indeed, we are successful in removing the virus of the entrenched powers. This is most likely going to be a long, drawn-out event, and could be why we can't see into the data gap. So my question is, whether in the chatter you see on the far side of the gap, does it indicate that we are successful in our engagement, or do we fail, or do we merely reset the human experience so we can try to get it right again?
The data originally that had the longest term stuff came from, say, 2003 through about 2007. We started running into the immediacy fog in 2007 and didn't really understand what was going on until sometime in 2009. So the snapshot we had from 2003 to 2007, I think, was the purest long-term data we ever got. And I was really fascinated with the long-term data and did everything I could to cultivate that view. So, and a lot of it has turned out to be very prescient, because some of the data in 2003 long-term was focused on 2011 and actually was extremely prescient because it was talking about the birds falling out of the sky and all of the kind of things that happened and that should not have been able to be foreseen that far out. And so I like that data set. And basically, this is a little bit of humanism here. On a very personal level, this speaker, that is me, this body, gets an emotional response to some data sets over time because they turned out to be so good, so to speak. It's like finding a jewel and you look at it and it's a stone, but you polish it up and you just get an emotional attachment to it, a sentimental attachment. And so I've always liked that particular long-term data set that emerged from 2003 to 2007 because it did present a successful viewpoint. And it said basically it had data going out as far as 2041. Of course, necessarily virtually no detail, just extremely broad brush and even hardly any paint sticking on the brush to give us a hint. But the hints that we had were very hopeful. There's going to be some crisis that affects the United States, assuming we get through this 2020 period. What we will think of as continental United States, the North American continent probably is a better way to look at it, is going to face some kind of a crisis along with the rest of the planet around 2030. And I think that perhaps the humans that will exist at the time on this continent will, maybe in my way of thinking, that'll perhaps be the best humans ever because of the way that they respond. And I'm not going to characterize it any more than that, but that data set in 2003 to 2007 that had this long-term data showed a period of struggle. And the reason I have the twinkle is that we are right at the door of the struggle. And we've entered the dojo, the mat's been swept, we've taken our claws and we've wiped the mat down, we've used the hydrogen peroxide, we've cleaned up all the blood from the old fight, everybody's taken their position beside the mat, we've all sat down in seiza, and we're about ready to, we're doing our breathing exercises and getting our bodies all tuned because we're going to get up and start demonstrating our arts here really quick. I think within probably less than 30 days, many of us will be called upon to demonstrate our arts as we go forward, and all of us will feel this by March. The long-term data sets themselves that are effective now, that were shown from 2003 to 2007, have been some of the best sets we ever had for sheer number of forecast linguistics showing up. So I have no reason to doubt at this stage that we will be successful as a group in coming through the challenges of these next few years. The challenges extend to 2020 insofar as the social order was concerned and the local environment, which is to say planet Earth. It started calming down in our data around 2021 through 2025. And it was noticeable in the language that after 2025, a lot of the earth changes kind of language that we have now, that we're even taking as routine, words about volcanoes, earthquakes, and so on, really dropped out of the picture after 2025. So it's as though we really settled down by then. And then there was one major crisis in 2030 that related to the planet as a whole, but it was a brief period of time, and whatever it is can be addressed by human action. So I take that as a positive. So to answer your question, and to provide an element of certainty of hope, if not outcome. The language and the long-term data set that was our most accurate ever, that gave us some of the spectacular hits on the aside, the immediacy sets of those data provided us with the 3-week warning on the Northeast power outage and some of our other greater hits. That data set says we come through this. And it says that even some of the powers that be come through it, although in a much changed fashion. We are able to basically integrate some of the acquisitor class, the greed-obsessed humans, back into being regular folk.
That's awesome to hear. That's very
I wish I had
encouraging.
enough details to be able to provide a better picture. But when we hit the immediacy wall, I was actually looking towards tuning that data set from 2007 into 2011 towards getting the far look, we called it, for a long time, because I wanted to go out 100 years. That was my goal. I just had this idea that we could actually 120 to do a seclorum. But the immediacy wall hit us, and all of that went to hell. So maybe if I'd been more focused earlier, I could have gotten it. I just don't know. But still, though, there's positive there, and we are at that point where we're going to start demonstrating our art. So it's big key forward time. It's full-time commitment now. There's no need to hold back. Basically, we are all dead individuals. We will all someday wake up to discover ourselves dead. So if there's a better time to do it, I'd sure like to know when.
I'm ready.
Same here. It's onegashimasu. With respect, let us begin.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Green Meadow. I'm ready too. The next question in the topic of war is Rusky.
Hi, Clif.
Hello.
Wow. This has been one of the most interesting discussions, one of the best interviews that I've ever heard. And I've listened to many of your interviews. Thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. And I have to thank the rest for just being such good interviewers, for asking the right questions. It really gives a lot of insight into your.
You guys are
Anyways.
good. I mean, I've got to say that. There's a lot of people you interview that I know from their linguistics, they tremble. They go out and they study for days just because they're afraid of you guys. And you are good. The questions you ask really involve a deep conversation, and I love it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Anyways, my question is perhaps of a more prosaic nature. It's quite simple. When do the web bots describe release language such that it may be associated with scalar warfare in the Middle East? And how will this affect us in North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa?
The first hints we get of that are in this weird, or not weird, but in the plateau of language that appears around the 2nd to 3rd of March and then extends to the point that it goes down into release language. So I suspect there's going to be a period of maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks of Cuban Missile-style crisis brinksmanship sometime in March, or something, an analog of that in terms of the emotional language. Maybe it might be that there's been a solar crisis and it's not really warfare. Whatever it will be tension-wise, the scalar language appears then. The reason that I say mention the sun is we have a lot of language sets that are identical in the powers that be, in the populous entities, as well as in the space goat farts entity, and all of those sets are associated with scalar, but in the space goat farts entity, it's all solar driven. So we may experience scalar level effects that are solar driven, and we can't tell that in the language, but they start appearing in the language around the 2nd of March. At that point, we're at a slightly curving plateau. The plateau itself, if we were to stretch it out, has a little tiny peak about the 11th or 12th of March, so close enough to the Ides of March that we might as well say the 15th. And then it continues flat out for a number of days, 5 or 6 days, and then it crashes near the equinox. And it's also muddied there. We can't say for sure which day it actually goes on. We don't have an hour and a time in this case because the data is just up and down with these release to building tension swings of